Viewer discretion advised. Images are used for illustration purposes only. Celebration, Florida. The name alone evokes images of joy, community, and American perfection. This master-planned neighborhood, built by Disney, boasts picturesque streets, manicured lawns, and families who wave at each other during morning jogs. But behind one white-trimmed door on Reserve Place, a haunting silence had been growing. One that no neighbor could hear through the pastel facades and painted-on smiles. What lay behind that door would soon unravel the myth of suburban bliss. It began with an odor, something off. Neighbors said they assumed it was a dead animal in the nearby woods. After all, no one had seen the Todd family in weeks. But that wasn't entirely unusual for Anthony Todd, a physical therapist who split time between Florida and Connecticut. And Megan, his wife, was reportedly sick. The kids, quiet, always had been. No alarms, no screams, just silence, until January 13, 2020. Federal agents and Osceola County deputies arrived at 202 Reserve Place to serve Anthony with a warrant. Not for murder, but for health care fraud. What they were about to walk into was something no badge had prepared them for. As they breached the front door, a wave of decay hit them first. Not a scent you forget. The inside of the house looked eerily untouched. Christmas decorations still hung, but something felt wrong. Too still, too perfect. Upstairs in a master bedroom that should have held warmth and life, they found the decomposing bodies of Megan Todd and her 3 children, Alec 13, Tyler 11, Zoe just 4. And then there was Breezy, the family dog, lifeless, silent, like the rest. And standing in the hallway was Anthony Todd, dazed, gaunt, barely recognizable. He didn't run, he didn't resist, he simply told them, almost too calmly, "I did it. This is the Untold Trace, and I am your host." What drove a husband and father to commit an act so vile that even seasoned officers had to step out of the home to collect themselves? Why did nobody hear anything? And how did a man accused of fraud end up confessing to a massacre? From the outside, the Tots looked like the perfect family. Megan ran a homeschooling group and loved yoga. Anthony operated a successful physical therapy business. Their children were always polite, always smiling in pictures. Social media painted the usual portrait. Vacations, family outings, happy birthdays. But happiness is often the mask worn by dysfunction. In the days that followed the discovery, the community of celebration spiraled. Media vans crowded the quiet streets. Neighbors stood behind police tape, whispering, guessing. Some wept. Others speculated. Could Anthony have been forced to do it? Was this a home invasion gone wrong? A cult? A murder-suicide? But there was no forced entry, no other suspects, no signs of struggle, just a note, a haunting one, found on the dining table. "To the Todd family, I'm sorry." It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. As autopsy results came in, the story only grew darker. The children had been drugged with large doses of Benadryl. The older boys, Alec and Tyler, showed signs of stabbing. Megan too, but Zoe, no stab wounds. Her cause of death was harder to determine, hidden behind the haze of decomposition and sedation. Breezy the dog was also poisoned. The medical examiner ruled the deaths as homicide. All 4, methodical, slow. Back in custody, Anthony remained mostly calm, at times dazed, at others cooperative. He admitted to the killings, said Megan helped, then changed his story, said Megan did it, then said they had a pact, then said they were trying to cross over together. What does that even mean? The public was stunned. A man trusted by patients, a woman trusted by her children, both now at the center of a nightmare that left 4 lives stolen, and a dog, symbolically loyal to the end, sacrificed along with them. It didn't take long for the press to devour the narrative. They called it the Disneyland Murder House, a cruel nickname for a cruel reality. But Celebration had never seen anything like this before. And frankly, neither had most of the country. Investigators began piecing together what little timeline they had. Friends said they last heard from Megan in mid-December. Anthony had been dodging subpoenas. He told colleagues he had the flu. Neighbors noticed the house growing quiet after the holidays, but nobody suspected murder. And the house? It remained untouched for weeks, the family decomposing in the master bedroom, Christmas decorations still glowing at night. A horror show disguised as a holiday postcard. The most chilling detail? Anthony had been living in the home with the bodies for days, possibly weeks, sleeping, eating, existing, side by side with death. There were signs he had attempted suicide, a bottle of Benadryl, a confession note. But when agents arrived, he was very much alive, almost as if waiting to be caught. As authorities brought him in for questioning, the full weight of what happened still hadn't sunk in for the community. Parents pulled their kids out of playgroups. Homeschooling moms fell silent. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody could understand. How could a man kill his own family slowly and over days, without a sound? How could celebration, this utopia born from dreams and fantasy, become the scene of a massacre? And most importantly, what was Anthony Todd hiding? Follow and subscribe to The Untold Trace as we uncover the chilling truths behind the facade of a perfect family. The deeper we go, the darker it gets. Before the blood dried on the floorboards of 202 Reserve Place, before the news cameras parked outside Celebration's quiet cul-de-sacs, before Anthony Todd's name would be forever associated with betrayal, there was the illusion of normalcy, the perfect family, the American dream. But underneath the festive wreaths, yoga mats, and smiling Christmas cards, something had already rotted. Anthony Todd wasn't just a father or a husband. He was a man under pressure, and pressure, when ignored, doesn't fade. It multiplies, quietly, invisibly, until it breaks. In 2020, as the media picked apart the Todd family's story, a new portrait emerged. Not one of idyllic suburbia, but of a crumbling empire built on lies, debt, and delusion. Anthony ran a physical therapy practice in Colchester, Connecticut, called Family Physical Therapy. Patients respected him. He was friendly, professional, and had built the business up over years. But what patients didn't know was that behind his calm demeanor, the walls were closing in. His business was in serious financial trouble. According to federal records, Anthony Todd was being investigated for healthcare fraud, submitting false claims to Medicaid and private insurers. The investigation had been ongoing for months, and by late 2019, authorities were closing in. They had evidence. They had witness testimony. It was only a matter of time. At the same time, the family had racked up significant personal debt. Reports showed that Anthony had taken out loans, maxed out credit cards, and was living far beyond the family's means. They had defaulted on several payments, including their home mortgage. Their property in Celebration was nearing foreclosure, and then there was the weight of secrets. Despite these dire circumstances, the Tots were living like everything was fine. Megan homeschooled the kids and posted cheerful photos of family outings. Anthony continued to fly back and forth between Florida and Connecticut, juggling his failing business while keeping his family in the dark. Or so it seemed. But the truth was harder to trace. What did Megan know? What did the kids understand? Were they aware that their world, the structure, the safety, the plans for the future, was hanging by a thread? Neighbors began to speak out. Some said Megan had grown more isolated in the final months of 2019. Others recalled strange behavior from Anthony, avoiding eye contact, walking briskly to the car, never stopping to chat like he once had. Megan, they said, looked tired, worried, but she smiled anyway. Always smiled. As for the children, they were rarely seen outside. Megan had chosen homeschooling after the family's move from Connecticut to Florida. She believed in tight-knit parenting, but after their deaths, some questioned whether it was isolation or control. Still, nobody suspected murder. And why would they? This was Celebration. Families didn't kill each other here. Fathers didn't sedate and stab their own children. Mothers didn't become conspirators in their own demise. These things didn't happen in neat neighborhoods with HOA regulations and artificial lakes. But the pressure was real and growing. By December 2019, Anthony had already missed several court appearances related to the fraud investigation. Federal agents were actively building a case. Subpoenas were piling up. His license to practice could be revoked. His business, the one thing he had built with his name, was on the brink of collapse, and he wasn't telling anyone. Friends from Connecticut said they hadn't heard from him in weeks. Employees at his clinic were confused by his absence. He claimed he had the flu. He canceled appointments. One employee described his emails as off and noted a growing sense of distance. Meanwhile, back in Celebration, Megan told neighbors Anthony was under the weather and recovering. But no one saw him. He didn't answer the door. He didn't step outside. The house grew quieter by the day, and then it was silent. What happened between the beginning of December and January 13 remains a void, filled only by Anthony's shifting stories. In his first confession, he told investigators that he had killed his wife and children, slowly over a series of days. He said he gave them Benadryl to sedate them, then suffocated and stabbed them. First Megan, then Alec, then Tyler, then Zoe, then the dog Breezy. Why? He claimed they had made a family suicide pact, that they believed the world was ending, that it was the only way to move on together. But in later versions, Anthony changed the narrative entirely. He wrote a 27-page letter from jail, claiming Megan had killed the kids and then died by suicide. He said she had poisoned them with Tylenol PM and stabbed them while he was in another room, that he had discovered the bodies, panicked, and tried to take his own life. The autopsy didn't support that version. Megan had defensive wounds. The children had high levels of Benadryl in their systems and were clearly sedated before being killed. There were no signs that Megan had harmed herself, nor that she alone had committed the killings. Anthony was lying, or delusional, maybe both. But in the months leading up to the murders, there were hints of deeper psychological deterioration. He had begun following apocalyptic conspiracy theories, including beliefs that the world was ending and that death was the only way to escape suffering. He was obsessed with control, with protecting his family from what was coming. The pressure, the fear, the delusions, they had built a cage around him. And then sometime between December 14 and 26, he snapped. The timeline, though murky, points to a slow, calculated unraveling. December 14th, Megan last texts a friend. December 16th, Anthony sends vague messages to Connecticut associates. December 18th, last confirmed sighting of the children. December 26th, neighbor notices a rotting smell, but assumes it's trash. January 13th, authorities force entry. For weeks, Anthony Todd lived inside that house, alongside the dead. The Florida heat, even in December, accelerated decomposition. The smell grew unbearable. But he stayed. Why? Was he waiting for death? For judgment? Or was he simply unable to confront what he had done? One neighbor later described seeing him walk the dog in the days before Christmas. But that couldn't have been Breezy. She was already dead. So, what or who was he walking? The story was no longer about a man under pressure. It was now about a mind breaking apart. One who could step over his children's bodies to get a glass of water. One who could smile at a neighbor, then return to a tomb of his own making. The cracks had been there all along. Financial collapse, legal stress, emotional detachment, isolation. But no one saw just how deep they ran or how far he would fall. In the end, the illusion of control became a blueprint for destruction, and the man who once helped people walk again had now paralyzed his entire world in blood. Back in Celebration, Florida, the days passed with eerie silence around the Tott residence. Neighbors noticed something was off. The home, once filled with the laughter of children and the rhythm of daily life, now seemed to sit in stillness, untouched and unlived in. Packages piled up at the doorstep. The Christmas decorations, cheerfully put up weeks prior, remained untouched. Lights stayed off at night. No movement, no life. A friend of Megan's grew increasingly concerned. Text messages went unanswered. Calls rang endlessly. The children, once regulars in the neighborhood, hadn't been seen playing outside or attending school. Tony, who was always active in the family's routines, seemed to have vanished without a word. That silence, so complete and so unnatural, became deafening. Meanwhile, back in Connecticut, Tony's past was beginning to catch up with him. Authorities were looking into his physical therapy business, family physical therapy. There were financial irregularities, allegations of insurance fraud, claims submitted for treatments never rendered, appointments that didn't exist, and signatures forged. The scale of the accusations pointed to a prolonged deception. The walls were closing in. Tony Todd was now a man under federal investigation. On January 9th, 2020, federal agents made their way to Florida, not to search for missing persons, but to serve a warrant related to the fraud investigation. When they arrived at the Todd residence, they found the home locked, windows drawn, and no response at the door. What they didn't expect was the silence behind those walls to hide a far more tragic secret. A few days later, on January 13th, agents returned, this time accompanied by local law enforcement. They forced entry into the house. Inside, they were hit with a scent, unmistakable and haunting. The air was heavy, the rooms were cold, and in one of the upstairs bedrooms, they made a discovery that would shake even the most seasoned officers. Inside the master bedroom, in an upstairs corner of the house, they found multiple family members. They had been there for days, possibly weeks. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood spatter, no overturned furniture, just stillness, like time had stopped. Next to them was Tony Todd, weak and barely conscious. He was found in what appeared to be a state of self-inflicted harm. He told officers that he had tried to take his own life and claimed responsibility for what had happened. His words were numb, detached, almost surreal. What he described would form the basis of a horrifying confession. Tony admitted that he had ended the lives of his wife and children days before the discovery. His tone was calm. He said it was a decision made together with his wife, one that involved faith, delusion, and despair. He spoke of the end of the world, of escaping suffering, and of unity in the afterlife. Authorities listened in disbelief. The horror of what they had uncovered in that quiet suburban home cut deep. The details, though kept vague in public documents to protect the dignity of the deceased, painted a tragic portrait of a father who had crossed a line few could imagine. A man once trusted by patients and loved ones alike had committed an act that defied every instinct of protection and care. Investigators pieced together the timeline. Based on Tony's statements and physical evidence, it appeared that the events had taken place sometime in late December, shortly before or after Christmas. He had remained in the home with the victims for days. No attempts had been made to alert authorities. He simply stayed there, drifting between rationalization and despair. The community of celebration was in shock. This wasn't just another headline. It was their neighbor, their children's classmates. The Tots were known in town, active, friendly, seemingly normal. And yet something had unraveled so deeply behind closed doors that no one saw it coming. News of the crime spread across national outlets. What began as a fraud investigation had turned into one of the most unsettling domestic tragedies in Florida's recent memory. People were left asking how. How could someone fall so far? How could no one have noticed? How does a man make such a horrific decision and live alongside it for days? Forensic experts were brought in to confirm the timeline and causes of death. Toxicology reports, DNA samples, and post-mortem analyses revealed chilling insights, but much of the detailed findings were kept sealed. The court documents, though, made one thing clear. The loss of life was intentional. There was no ambiguity. Tony Todd had committed a premeditated act, and his calm admission to it disturbed investigators even more than the scene itself. In interviews following his arrest, Tony maintained that he had been overwhelmed by debt, by illness, by paranoia. He spoke of shared belief systems, spiritual escape, and cleansing. He said Megan agreed with the decision, but no one could independently verify that. There was no note from her, no video, just Tony's word, and that word quickly lost credibility in the eyes of both investigators and the public. As more details emerged, the case became a mirror into the psychology of a man who had lived a dual life. On one hand, a caregiver and father, on the other, someone unraveling under the weight of lies and stress. The contrast was almost too much to bear. The surviving family members, including extended relatives, were devastated. They hadn't been aware of the true depth of Tony's struggles. Grief turned to confusion, and confusion to anger. They had lost not just one person, but an entire branch of their family tree. What remained was an empty house on Reserve Place, a neighborhood haunted not by ghosts, but by silence and sorrow, and a man behind bars awaiting judgment, not just from the court, but from a nation trying to understand what drives someone to destroy everything they once held dear. Like, comment and subscribe to The Untold Trace. This case isn't just about murder, it's about delusion, manipulation, and a man who built a fortress of lies to protect himself from the truth. Stay with us. In the sterile quiet of the Osceola County Courthouse, a man once seen as a loving husband and devoted father sat at the defendant's table, pale, hollow, his frame sunken beneath the orange of a prison jumpsuit. Anthony Todd no longer looked like the smiling therapist from Connecticut who posed for family Christmas photos. The man now on trial was a ghost of himself, and yet it was the ghosts of four others that truly haunted the courtroom. Megan, Alec, Tyler, Zoe. Their names echoed throughout the proceedings like a grim mantra. Innocence lost, a family silenced, a case soaked in confusion, betrayal, and chilling contradictions. The trial began in April 2022, more than 2 years after the horrific discovery inside the Celebration, Florida home. The world had changed during that time. The pandemic had swept across the country. But for those who followed the Todd case, time had frozen on January 13th, 2020, the day the illusion shattered. The prosecution wasted no time laying out the facts. They weren't here to speculate. They were here to prove that Anthony Todd methodically murdered his wife, 3 children, and their dog, that he sedated them with Benadryl, stabbed them, and then lived among their decomposing bodies for weeks. That his motivation wasn't love, but desperation, an escape from financial ruin, criminal charges, and the fear of losing control. Lead prosecutor Danielle Pinnell delivered the opening statement with chilling precision. He didn't just kill them, he planned it. He drugged them. He lied to their faces and tucked them into bed for the last time. He had options, but instead, he chose murder. They presented the physical evidence. Autopsy reports showing lethal levels of diphenhydramine in each victim's system stab, wounds on Megan, Alec, and Tyler defensive injuries. Proof that at least some of the victims had fought the absence of self-inflicted wounds on Megan, refuting the suicide theory Anthony's search history, including how much Benadryl to sedate a child. His confession to detectives, given voluntarily after his arrest, the evidence was overwhelming. And yet, the defense clung to one final lifeline. Anthony Todd didn't kill his family, they claimed. Megan did. It was a bold, desperate defense built entirely on a letter Anthony wrote from jail, months after his initial confession. In it, he painted his wife as mentally unstable and suicidal. He claimed she poisoned the children with Tylenol PM-infused desserts, then stabbed them while he was unconscious or drugged. According to this version, he awoke to find them dead and, in his grief, attempted suicide. But this version of the story, his fourth, raised more questions than it answered. Why was there no sign of struggle from Megan against herself? Why did all the fingerprints on the murder weapons and Benadryl bottles belong to Anthony? Why had he initially confessed so clearly, saying, "I did it"? And why did he change his story only after learning that the death penalty had been waived? The jury listened. They took notes, but they saw through the cracks. During witness testimony, former colleagues, family friends, and investigators described a man who had been slowly unraveling. Financial documents revealed that Anthony was over $100,000 in debt. He had been under federal investigation for months. His Connecticut clinic had been shuttered, and court summonses were piling up. One former employee described him as detached and jittery in the final weeks of 2019. Another recalled that he had started making strange, apocalyptic references, talking about everything ending soon and that he was protecting his family. Forensic psychiatrists brought in by the prosecution argued that Todd showed signs of narcissistic personality disorder and delusional thinking, but was fully capable of understanding right from wrong. He wasn't insane. He was calculated, controlled, methodical. And then came the most haunting testimony of all, from the medical examiner who described in excruciating detail how the children died. How Alec and Tyler had high levels of Benadryl, but still fought back. How little Zoe had no visible injuries, but enough diphenhydramine in her system to kill 10 adults. How Megan had bruises and stab wounds that could not have been self-inflicted. How Breezy, the family dog, was poisoned too, because even a loyal pet could be a witness. The courtroom was silent. No gasps, no crying. Just tension so thick it felt like a noose tightening around Anthony Todd's neck. He chose not to testify in his own defense. Instead, the court heard more from his jailhouse letters, his rambling, contradicting versions of the story. He wrote of passing over, of religious visions, of being misunderstood. He described dreams that he claimed were memories. He offered no consistent timeline, no real motive, just fragments of a story where he was always the misunderstood victim. The prosecution made their final argument with fire in their voice. He lied. He changed his story again and again. But the truth is this: he killed them. He killed them all because he couldn't face the consequences of his own actions. And then it was over. The jury took just a few hours to return the verdict. Guilty on all counts. 4 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of animal cruelty. Judge Keith Karsten delivered the sentence in a somber courtroom. Your actions were calculated, cold. You had every opportunity to choose differently. Instead, you ended the lives of 4 innocent beings, including your own children. Anthony Todd was sentenced to 4 life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus an additional year for the death of Breezy. He showed no visible reaction, no tears, no breakdown, just a blank stare, as if watching a story play out in which he no longer played the lead. And so, justice was delivered. But for many, justice felt incomplete because no verdict could bring back Megan. No sentence could rewind the final moments of Alec, Tyler, and Zoe. No judgment could answer the question that lingered in every parent's heart. Why? The crime was done. The home was quiet once more. But silence didn't bring peace, only more questions. The autopsies revealed something horrifying. Not only had Anthony Todd murdered his wife and 3 children, but he had also killed the family dog, Breezy. The image of a man kneeling before his trusting children, drugging them with Benadryl before taking their lives, haunted even the most hardened detectives. There was no outburst of rage, no momentary lapse in judgment. It was cold, methodical, planned. When the truth reached the extended family and friends, it shattered them. Nobody saw this coming, not even close. Friends of Megan Todd, who remembered her as warm and devoted, couldn't wrap their minds around what had happened. Megan had stayed quiet about their financial troubles. She had posted smiling pictures on social media. She had, in every visible way, kept up the appearance of a happy, stable home. But behind closed doors, Megan was ill, physically and emotionally. And Anthony, carrying the crushing weight of lies and debts, was spiraling. He had spoken to family in vague, cryptic language in the months prior. If anything happens, just know we love you, he had told one relative. The community of Celebration, Florida, a town designed by Disney to be a utopian neighborhood of perfect lawns, pastel houses, and community joy, was rocked. Murder wasn't supposed to happen here, certainly not annihilation, and yet the yellow tape stretched across one of those idyllic porches, serving as a cruel reminder that pain finds its way even into picture-perfect suburbs. In court, Anthony Todd pled not guilty at first, but he eventually confessed, partially. His version? Megan had killed the kids. He had come home and found them dead, he claimed. In his horror, he said, he killed Megan in response. And later, in his grief and confusion, attempted to overdose. But investigators didn't buy it. The timeline didn't add up. The bodies showed signs of having been killed in similar ways. Poisoned, then stabbed. One of the children had likely been smothered. Megan's body, too, showed signs that she had been drugged with Benadryl before her death. No signs pointed to her being the instigator. Instead, the story Anthony told appeared to be a weak attempt to salvage some shred of dignity in the face of unforgivable acts. When his trial began in April 2022, Anthony sat emotionless. He looked gaunt, almost fragile. The prosecution painted him as a calculated man who chose to destroy his family, rather than face the consequences of his lies. The defense offered no clear counter. There was no insanity plea, no emotional breakdown to analyze, just a man who broke under pressure and decided his family shouldn't live without him. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Anthony Todd was found guilty on all counts, 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of animal cruelty. He received life in prison without the possibility of parole. There would be no freedom, no redemption, no closure that could undo the horror. The courtroom was filled with sobs as the verdict was read. Friends and extended family members wept, not just for the loss, but for the failure to notice the signs. There were whispers. Could they have done something? Could a phone call, a visit, a check-in have made a difference? One juror later remarked, "You expect to hear about these things on the news. You don't expect to live it from inside the courtroom." In the aftermath, a deeper conversation began about mental health, financial pressure, and the danger of isolation. Anthony Todd had been drowning, but instead of reaching out, he pulled everyone he loved underwater with him. Megan's sister released a letter to the press. In it, she spoke of her sister's radiant spirit, her devotion to her kids, and her talent as a yoga instructor. "She deserved peace," she wrote, "not this." A memorial was held months later in Connecticut, where the Todd family had once lived. Photos of Alec, Tyler, and Zoe lined the church walls. Their smiles, genuine, full of life, seemed to glow. A slideshow played with family clips. Alec learning the piano, Tyler running in the backyard, Zoe clinging to her father's leg and laughing. The contrast was unbearable. Those who knew the Tots were left with nothing but memories and unanswerable questions. Could this have been prevented? Were there signs that were missed? And what kind of pressure, what darkness, drives a man to look at his own children and take their lives? The house in Celebration was eventually emptied and sold. Its cheerful exterior still deceives passersby. Tourists walk by unaware, snapping pictures of the perfect neighborhood, never knowing what once happened behind that front door. Online, the case sparked intense discussion. Some blamed Megan. Others condemned Anthony as a coward and monster. True crime forums debated whether Anthony had experienced a psychotic break or had simply been unwilling to let his image collapse. But beyond the noise, a core truth remained. 3 innocent children and a loving woman were taken from the world in a crime so cruel, it defied comprehension. This wasn't just a family tragedy. It was a reminder, a haunting lesson, that appearances can be deceiving, and the pressure to maintain perfection can drive even the most seemingly loving people to the edge of horror. This is The Untold Trace. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and check out our other gripping episodes. Stay aware, stay safe, and always look beyond the surface.